Good afternoon, members. Can we all come to order, please? First item on our agenda this afternoon, questions to the First Minister. Question 1, Russell George.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on ambulance response times?
Yes, the Welsh Ambulance Service continues to exceed the national target to respond to immediately life-threatening or red calls within 8 minutes. In August, 74.4% of red calls received a response within 8 minutes, with a median response time of just over 5 minutes.
Thank you for your answer, First Minister. Back in March, I questioned the Cabinet Secretary for Health on ambulance response times in Powys, following delays at the time it takes for an ambulance to arrive following a 999 call. And this has been partly attributed to ambulances waiting outside hospitals to transfer patients into the care of hospital staff. In a letter to me on the 24th of July, the Chief Exec of the Welsh Ambulance Trust confirmed that the average ambulance handover times for January to June of this year was 9 minutes for Telford, 26 minutes for Shrewsbury, and a shocking 1 hour and 2 minutes for Wrexham Myler. I would be grateful if you could provide details about what you're doing to improve the handover time at Wrexham Myler, which of course is under the direct control of Welsh Government, to prevent further delays to ambulance response times for the residents of Montgomeryshire.
Well, there are obviously issues as well in the English hospitals as well, and there will be times when demand is particularly acute. So what I can tell him, though, in terms of Powys in August, 71.2% of red calls received a response within 8 minutes. That's above the national target of 65% for the 4th consecutive month. The typical response time for that type of call was around 4 minutes and 8 seconds, the fastest typical response time in Wales that month. And finally, whilst no formal time target is in place for amber calls, the typical response to an amber call in Powys was 20 minutes and 17 seconds in January, again, better than the national average of 24 minutes and 19 seconds.
Thank you. Rhys Iorwerth.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We are usually talking about ambulance responses to people who have physical ailments, but there are people who have mental health issues too, and we don't have specific teams that respond to mental health calls. Now in Sweden, in Stockholm particularly, because of the high number of suicides, there is a special team which has been established, which is a psychiatric emergency response team. Now, given the need for emergency response to people with acute mental health problems or those at risk of suicide, would you as First Minister agree that the ambulance service in Wales should be looking at the possibility of creating an emergency or rapid mental health team in Wales?
Well, it's an interesting idea, and of course we have focused on CAMS, and of course that doesn't include adults, but when a person is in a mental health crisis, well, they don't tend to think of ambulances or hospitals as the first protocol, but it is an interesting concept, and I will ask the Cabinet Secretary to respond to the member.
Llywydd. First Minister, there has been a massive increase in demand for ambulances, up around 128% over the last 2 decades. But the new clinical response model is supposed to ensure that those in the most need get the fastest response, be that a fully crewed ambulance or a rapid response paramedic. However, last year, 16% of red calls took longer than 10 minutes and 68 people waited more than half an hour for an emergency response. So, First Minister, do you agree that this is unacceptable? And will you outline the actions your government will take to reduce the number of red calls taking more than 10 minutes and eliminate the number of calls taking over half an hour to respond? Thank you.
Well, I'd be very disappointed if calls took over half an hour to respond onto a red call. As far as red calls are concerned, we are well above target, not 100%, I understand that, but we're well above target in terms of ambulances reaching people when they are needed. There has been an issue that's been raised in terms of amber calls, of course. There are some patients who continue to wait longer than we would expect, and I know that the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Services has commissioned the Chief Ambulance Services Commissioner to look at the amber category, to conduct a clinically led review of the amber category. That does include serious but not life-threatening calls, around about almost 2/3 of the call volume, actually, of the Welsh Ambulance Service. And I know that the Cabinet Secretary will update members over the course of the next few weeks.
Question 2, Julie Morgan.
What plans does the Welsh Government have to support Welsh universities?
Well, we recognise the importance of a thriving, world-class HE sector to the economic and social well-being of Wales. We will continue to provide support, of course, to the sector through FMQ, which, together with our student support reforms, will create a stronger and more sustainable sector in Wales.
I thank the First Minister for that response, and I know the First Minister will agree that the continuing uncertainty over Brexit is having a massive impact on the university sector. And unfortunately, Welsh universities saw the biggest drop in the UK in the number of EU applicants between 2017 and 2018. So what help can the Welsh Government offer to the universities, which are obviously a crucial part of our economy in Wales, to halt or try to reverse this downward trend of EU students coming to Welsh universities?
Well, I can say that the Cabinet Secretary for Education has announced several additional elements of funding for HEFCU over the next few years, including £6 million in 2017 to 18 to deal with the short-term implications of demographic change and preparation for the implications of Brexit. We've also allocated £3.5 million to Global Wales 2 from the European Transition Fund to boost international marketing and links for the HE sector in Wales, and we'll look at further opportunities for the EU Transition Fund to support the sector.
Andrew Davis.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, clearly the offer isn't strong enough at the moment. When you look at the figures, a 7% drop from non-EU countries and a 10% drop from EU countries coming to Welsh universities, yet England, Scotland and Northern Ireland all saw increases in the number of students enrolling in their universities. Rather than focusing on the money, which is welcome, how are you going to change the offer that actually starts getting more students coming to Wales, such as the other offers that are available in other parts of the United Kingdom are seeing increases in their enrolment numbers?
Well, there is an issue, of course, which affects all of the UK, and that's the issue of what's been done with migration. Students feel unwelcome. Certainly that's something I've picked up many times in terms of students from India. They feel unwelcome in the UK. It's also hugely important that we're able to access the academic staff that are needed in order for universities to be competitive. And ultimately that's what it's all about. The universities compete in a world market. I've already explained what we are doing in terms of universities in Wales. And of course I very much encourage our universities to sell themselves abroad, to understand that they operate in a world market, and of course to make sure that more students come to Wales because of the quality of the University of Education that's available here.
Thank you. Claire Griffith.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, but the point is valid, isn't it? There is something unique about the figures here in Wales, because the rest of the UK have seen an increase of 2% in the undergraduates coming from the EU, but Wales has seen a reduction of 10%. Now, the suggestion by our own Education Secretary, of course, is that the way that support for students in Wales has changed now means that in looking at support that EU students may see, or have the perception at least, that they would receive less support than they would have done in the past. So with that specifically in mind, what's your government doing to market the opportunities and support available to those students? Because at the moment it's clear they're not hearing the message.
Well, I believe it's true to say that there has been an impact as regards changing the system of support for students. It's quite natural that we should see that. It's impossible to know whether that's true or not until we've had this system for a few years to see whether this is a blip or whether this is a trend. First, of course, it is the universities' duties to market themselves and, of course, to attempt to attract people into their universities. We've collaborated with universities. We've worked with a number of universities that have gone abroad in order to sell those universities globally. But what's important, of course, to ensure is that they have the academic staff that can offer the kind of education we would wish to see. And at present, what is endangering that is the fact that there is no clarity whatsoever as regards the status, what the status of academic staff from the EU and other countries will be, whether they'll be welcome here or not. I hope that the welcome will remain.
Party leaders turn to question the First Minister. First this afternoon, lead reply Cymru Llawn.
First Minister, do you believe that the Welsh Government has an obligation to implement universal childcare, and I quote, to help address the impacts of poverty and narrow the attainment gap when children start school?
Well, we have a very firm manifesto commitment which we will be taking forward.
First Minister, that quote that I used was from the leadership bid of the Cabinet Secretary for Children, Older People and Social Care. As I highlighted last week, your government is slashing school meals provision, and we have Cabinet Secretaries in your government who say one thing and then do the exact opposite. Now, the Children's Commissioner has lamented your childcare legislation as a large subsidy for some of Wales's highest earning families that is likely to reinforce inequalities. First Minister, you continue to turn your back on the politics of progress in favour of the politics of poverty. Do you accept that your regressive childcare offer is likely to reinforce inequality, or is it your view that the Children's Commissioner is wrong?
Well, two things. Let's kill this myth, first of all, that somehow the free school meal provision in Wales is worse than in England. It isn't. There are 3,000 more children who will receive free school meals as a result of what we're doing as a government. An extra £10 million has been put into the budget in order for that to happen. So this idea that somehow school meal provision is being slashed is simply untrue. It's simply untrue. I've already given the figures in terms of the finances and in terms of the children who will be affected. We put forward a radical and innovative plan to help working parents. That's what the offer is for working parents, because we know how difficult it can be for people to go back into work with the costs of childcare, and this is what this is designed to do, to help those people who want to get to work, to remove a barrier to employment, and to provide the childcare that people need at a time when they need that help in order to move back into the world of employment. That's what the scheme is designed to do.
Just like your school meals policy, with this, children will lose out, parents will lose out, and in particular, those who are struggling the most will lose out as a result of your childcare legislation. Now, studies from Ireland to Australia to here in Wales shows that one of the biggest barriers for people seeking work is access to high-quality childcare, and it's those very people, the people who are looking for work or those in education or in training, that your policy will exclude from childcare support. So, First Minister, this is a regressive policy. You'll be able to get free childcare if you're a couple earning £200,000, but if you're a struggling parent trying to get back into work or into training, you will be denied such support. How is this compatible with your supposed socialist values, First Minister?
Again, I come back to the point I made, which you didn't seem to have picked up on, which is this: that when it comes to free school meals, the offer we put on the table, it means £10 million more a year, and 3,000 more children will receive free school meals. I don't see how that's slashing free school meals. Let's make that absolutely clear now. Secondly, there is the PACE scheme, of course, that helps people get back into work. But she seems to contradict herself. On the one hand, she says it should be a universal scheme. Then she says it should be a scheme to help people get back into work. This is what it's designed to do, in order to help people get back into work and to offset the costs of childcare they otherwise have to pay, which makes it less attractive to go into work. Now, if that's what she's saying we should be doing, we are doing it, and we will take forward our manifesto offer and deliver the most generous childcare offer anywhere in the UK.
Leader of the Opposition, Paul Davies.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, are you ashamed of the A&E waiting times at Wrexham, Myler and Ysbyty Glan Clwyd hospitals, which were the worst ever on record, published this month?
They must improve, there's no question about that. But if we see performances elsewhere in the NHS, we see that A&E provision is improving. But clearly, there is a challenge that Bessie Cadwaladr must meet in order to reduce the waiting times of those hospitals.
Well, First Minister, this is a health board that has been under direct Welsh control for almost 3.5 years. What is there to show for your staged, improved and transformation plans? Well, the record speaks for itself. 1,900 patients waited longer than 12 hours at A&E services in North Wales. This is more than all the other health boards combined. This summer, more than 5,000 hours were lost because ambulances were delayed handing over patients at North Wales hospitals. In the last 12 months, 26,000 patient safety incidents were recorded, 10,000 more than in Cardiff. 233 of these have been severe incidents, more than double those in Cardiff. In the last 3 years, the Health Board has overspent by £88 million and has more than 2,000 patients waiting over a year for treatment. These are shocking statistics, and behind these figures are real people who are suffering as a result of your sheer incompetence to help this Health Board to improve. For 3 years, you have been responsible for these services and have set benchmarks to see this Health Board improve. You are clearly failing the people of North Wales. So can you now tell us what you and your government are going to do about this? What specific measures are you now going to take to start addressing this very serious situation?
Well, we acknowledge performance on those two sites is unacceptable. That's the first thing to say. It's a reflection of pressures and demands on hard-working staff. I've said that I expect the board to put into place meaningful actions to deal with this. Now, what have we done? Well, the board, with £1.5 million worth of support from Welsh Government, has put in place arrangements to target improvements and actions in respect of the unscheduled care system in the north. We've also provided £6.8 million earlier this year to strengthen the Health Board's operational capacity at each of the 3 main hospitals in the north. And that package of support is intended to enable the Health Board to increase its understanding of local challenges and make effective decisions to support immediate improvement. The NHS Wales Delivery Unit is also working at the Wrexham Milo site to support local performance management. Now, as I said, whilst the performance generally is unacceptable, the typical wait in BCU for patients to be seen, assessed and treated or discharged was 2 hours 48 minutes in August. Now, given the specific concern, which has been raised in fairness, about the August figures, a 90-day improvement cycle has been put in place and will be a point of focus for the board and clinical teams across the north. We will review the board's 90-day plan and decide whether any additional targeted support is required as a matter of urgency.
First Minister, the people of North Wales is in this position as a result of consistent underfunding, downgrading and neglect on behalf of your Welsh Government. Your sheer incompetence to lead this Health Board to an improved state is having huge consequences for the people of North Wales and the staff that work tirelessly to deliver their care. The people of North Wales deserve a safe and sustainable health service. Clearly, you have failed. So here's your chance, First Minister. Before you leave, will you now take this opportunity to apologise to the people of North Wales who you have so badly let down?
Well, first of all, these are two issues at 2 hospitals which have emerged in August that must be dealt with. He cannot surely stand there and say that austerity has nothing to do with this. When Northern Ireland had £1 billion given to it, a substantial amount of which was for health and education, which drove, I know it's painful, was given to health and education that drove a coach and horses through the Barnet formula. Where were the Welsh Conservatives? Mute, silent, indifferent. And let me tell him, he tries to paint a picture of the north of Wales as neglected. It was my great pleasure last week to go to Ysbyty Glan Clwyd and to open the Synnwyr. It was a tremendous... Whose fault is that? Is it my fault that the Synnwyr's been opened, apparently? There we are. A sub-regional neonatal intensive care unit. Opened, I remind the party opposite, because I commissioned a report to see whether it would be sustainable to place such a unit in the north of Wales. As a result of...
All calm down, please, and listen to what the First Minister has to say. Your leader asked the question. I'm addressing members on the benches to my right. Your leader asked a question. We need to hear the answer from the First Minister without any help from anybody else. Thank you.
As a result of that report, as a result of the action taken by a Welsh Labour government, there will now be many, many mothers in the north of Wales who will be able to have their babies safely and looked after safely in North Wales rather than having to travel to Liverpool. He may talk, we deliver.
Thank you. Leader of the UKIP group, Gareth Bennett.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First Minister, which of the following decisions do you think that Natural Resources Wales can be proudest of? Is it the dumping of 300,000 tonnes of nuclear mud approximately 1 mile from Cardiff Bay? Or is it giving a licence for a biomass incinerator which neighbours residential properties in Barry Dock? Or finally, is it refusing to sell timber from public woodland at market value, potentially fleecing the Welsh taxpayer of £1 million?
Well, the first two issues are operational matters in terms of permitting. The third issue is a matter which has been well explored and is not acceptable. Clearly, a lack of competence was exhibited by NRW to have oral contracts, whilst they may be technically legally valid, is not wise, because it's much better to have things written down. That's been explored, and rightly so, by the Public Accounts Committee. But may I remind him that his party are not exactly the best party to lecture on the environment. This is a party who, as far as I can see, have no interest in the environment at all, and who wanted to take us out of the European Union, which was singularly responsible for raising Britain's standards, which were so appalling when it came to the environment, particularly in the 70s and 80s. There was one river, I believe the River Irwell in Salford, that at one time would catch fire if you threw a lit match into it. It was the European Union that dragged Britain out of the gutter when it came to its environmental standards. Now, let's see what UKIP propose in order to preserve and enhance our environment for the future in the absence of that European framework.
Yes, you're talking about the European Union. I was asking you about your oversight of Natural Resources Wales, but thanks for leading us down a blind alley, First Minister.
Well, you did that.
Now, you mentioned the oversight of NRW by the Public Accounts Committee, and I'm glad you see a valuable role for the Public Accounts Committee in doing that. Now, your own backbenchers, of course, have an important role to play, a crucial role to play in scrutinising organisations like Natural Resources Wales. However, we have one backbench member who has played an exceedingly valuable role on the Public Accounts Committee in giving oversight to Natural Resources Wales. I note that that member is being rewarded for his sterling work by being removed from the Public Accounts Committee. Doesn't this just prove, First Minister, that you do not want proper scrutiny of organisations run by your government?
No. Well, I find it difficult to accept what the leader of UKIP says when he talks of the important work of the Public Affairs Committee, which I think is correct, and he talks of the need for scrutiny, yet at the same time wants to abolish the Assembly, thereby providing us with no scrutiny at all over NRW or over anything else. He calls for a second referendum on devolution and opposes one when it comes to Brexit. So when it comes to scrutiny, his answer to greater scrutiny is to remove the very scrutineers themselves, making it far more difficult for proper scrutiny to occur. And it's because of that scrutiny that the problems in NRW have helped to be identified. In years gone by, that level of scrutiny would never have been there in the days before devolution. That scrutiny, rightly so, has been exercised by the Public Accounts Committee, and it is a matter now for NRW, working with ourselves as a government, to rectify the situation.
Now, to go back to what your member said, your member of the Public Accounts Committee, at the height of the timber fiasco, I quote, "What is going on in NRW to have their accounts qualified for the third year running? It's unprecedented and frankly outrageous. I'm struggling to think of an explanation as to why this might be. Might it be corruption or incompetence? But it does appear that the forestry section of NRW is out of control. I think there needs to be accountability from the senior leadership of this organisation, which does appear to be out of control." End quote. Now, you're talking about me wanting to remove scrutiny. I'm talking about wanting to remove this entire useless institution, the Welsh Assembly, of which you've been at the heart of for 18 years. The problem is not the scrutiny by backbenchers, because when they do scrutinise, you rubbish it anyway and you remove them from the committees. The point is that the government you've been part of for 18 years isn't fit to run these institutions, and that's why the Welsh public gets an awful deal from the Welsh Assembly. Is that not the case, First Minister?
Yeah, there we go. So let me see now. There have been two referendums, one in 1997 and 2011. He doesn't accept the result. Yet he demands that there should be no referendum at all on the deal with Brexit. I mean, his hypocrisy is almost breathtaking. On the one hand, he says we need more scrutiny, and then he says we need to remove all scrutiny, without realising the contradiction of what he is saying. The member for Llanelli, I'm sure, is delighted by the support that's been given to him by the leader of UKIP. But he is somebody who holds government to account on the government backbenches, and exactly how he should do, as should be done. You know, Lee is somebody, the member for Llanelli is somebody who expresses his view, and he's right to do so. That's what government backbenchers are there to do, to make sure that as a Welsh Labour government we get things right. Now, I'm not sure what he's saying, get rid of the Assembly or get rid of NRW, I don't know. What I do know is that if ever UKIP got to power, and there were 7 of them to begin with, there are 4 of them now, who knows, there may be far fewer of them in the future. And part of the reason for this is because UKIP can't win anything, let's try and attack the body that we can't actually win an election to. But if ever UKIP ever got to power, we know there'd be no environmental regulatory body. It would be a free-for-all when it came to the environment. Our environment would be destroyed, our beaches would be ruined, all in the name of the mad free market philosophy that his party wants to expound. And that is the reality of UKIP. We will fight to make sure that the people of Wales, yes, have the government they deserve, the scrutiny they deserve, and to keep the body that they voted for, not just once, but voted for twice in terms of extra powers.
We'll return to questions on the order paper. Question 3, Susie Davis.
Diolch yn fawr, Dirprwy Llywydd. Will the First Minister provide an update on the Swansea Bay City deal?
Well, the 4 local authorities have reached a milestone with the approval of their joint committee agreement, and that's an important step in releasing government funding.
Well, thank you very much for that. Considering we're some way into the lifespans of these deals, it's a shame it's taken quite that long, but nevertheless. The Institute for Welsh Affairs has argued that there has to be more investment, research and innovation for us to have any chance of meeting the 100% of our energy demand from renewables by 2035. And the Homes as Power Station project is one aspect of the Swansea Bay City deal. Last week, the UK Government announced an additional £36 million for Swansea University, which is, of course, a partner in the deal, taking the investment to £100 million in 8 years so that the university can lead on innovation in energy for the UK. It's been welcomed by Tata Steel, Swansea itself, and Coastal Housing. I'm sure you welcome it as well. But it shows that the City deal is levering interest from other parties in investment. Can you tell us how your overseas visits have helped to do the same from other parts of the world?
Well, let me give you some examples. If we look at the States, I spent a lot of time talking to the companies that invest in Wales from America, same with Japan. I've spent a lot of time with companies in Europe who invest in Wales, amongst them Airbus, for example, Ford, Toyota I've met, and all these organisations very much value the presence of a First Minister or a government minister, because a minister can open doors that officials can't and agencies can't. What are the results? Best foreign direct investment figures for 30 years, and those figures speak for themselves. Unemployment 3.8%, that would have been unthought of in the days before devolution. She talks rightly, and she's right to say I'd support the initiative she's described, but a very good way of moving forward with increasing the amount of energy generated from renewable sources would have been the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, which the Conservative government rejected, thereby removing our chances of innovation, of taking forward, of leading the world in a technology, creation of 1,000 jobs, and of course many, many homes and manufacturing plants powered by renewable energy. That is a matter of great regret to me, and it's hugely important that the UK Government continues to review the decision that it has taken and to give Wales the same fair play as it wants to give to the DUP.
Lee Waters.
Diolch, Dirprwy Llywydd. I'm delighted that among the first projects that come through under the bid is the £200 million wellness village in Llanelli, which through its innovation promises to be an exemplar for the whole of Wales. I've been discussing with the Council how we can make sure that it joins in with the rest of Llanelli and doesn't become some out-of-town development. The traffic in the area is already intense in peak hours. So will the First Minister make sure that the emerging plans on the South Wales Metro are dovetailed into the developments around the wellness village?
Yeah, that'd be crucial. I mean, we can't... As with any development of this size, it cannot all be car-based, he's quite right. We have the Active Travel Act. It's hugely important that as we move the Metro forward, that there are proper bus connections, train connections where appropriate, and of course opportunities for active travel. no development such as the wellness village, given the fact that it is a wellness village, could properly be taken wholly seriously if active travel wasn't part of the message and the ethos of that wellbeing village. So he's absolutely right to say that the last thing I'd want to see is a development creating unacceptable levels of traffic, mainly because there's no other alternative for people other than to drive. We must create those alternatives.
Lloyd.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Along the same lines as Lee Waters, if truth be told, of course, in addition to the city deal itself, the 4 local authorities in the southwest of Wales acknowledge that transport is also an issue that they need to resolve at a regional level. And there has been a feasibility study to a Swansea Bay Metro and Metro for the Western Valleys, and clearly this is an important step forward in developing a public transport system which is modern for the southwest of Wales to link in with the kind of development that Lee was talking about. However, to date, virtually no details have been published since this work started on the feasibility study. When would you anticipate that the public will be told of progress on this project and will have an opportunity to discuss any ideas or plans?
Well, that is something for the local authority to progress. We will collaborate with them in order to implement the plans. I mean, it's a matter for them. I don't think they're at fault at all, but it's up to them to ensure that they have produce an effective and public scheme.
Make a statement on Welsh Government funding for social housing.
Well, social housing has always been, and will always be, of course, a fundamental priority for this government. We've never moved away from supporting those in greatest need, which is why we're making a record investment in social housing in the term of this government.
I mean, First Minister, you no doubt would have heard the Prime Minister's announcement for £2 billion for social homes in England, and she emphasised her pride in social housing, and I think we should all share that pride. It's been at the heart of the great house-building programmes throughout the last century, and sadly has tailed off in the 21st century. As part of the UK government's commitment to transform house building, it will give assured funding to housing associations, giving them long-term certainty to invest. And this is something that they've called for repeatedly here in Wales. So under the English scheme, associations will be able to apply for funding stretching as far ahead as 2028-29. Now, when we get the Barnett consequential, these monies do come on stream in the 2020s, will you make a similar commitment to ring-fence this money for social housing and sort out the grant schemes to housing associations so that they can invest for the long term and at last lead us to an age where we build enough houses for the people who need to live in them?
Well, there are... Well, I mean... I have the greatest respect for the member, but coming from a party that sold off so much social housing and didn't replace it and caused many of the problems we face now in the first place, so I do have to take that with a rather large pinch of salt. 2 things I'd say to him. Firstly, it is not clear whether there'll be a Barnett consequential yet. We know that the UK government are masters and mistresses of sleight of hand and will make funding announcements and then say this money is being found from within a department, in which case we get no Barnett consequential at all. We don't know is the answer to that yet. And secondly, of course, this is for 2022. I can't make commitments for any governments in place post-2021, not least because of the fact that I won't be here. So that will be a matter for any incoming government.
Bethan Syed.
So much of the future generations...
Thank you. I recognise that your government is carrying out an independent study at the moment into the definition of affordable housing, but I think the problem that has existed over the years with that is that new estates are developed in Wales which don't, according to a local definition, account to what is affordable locally. Now, before the summer, I raised with you the fact that Help to Buy allowed many families to upgrade their homes, families that perhaps don't need that funding support. Now, as part of the review that you're currently conducting as a government, would you look into this issue? Because perhaps there would be more funding available for affordable housing if some of those funds went into creating more social housing in our communities.
Well, the review will look at a great many issues in order to ensure that the policy is correct. But there is a difference between social housing and affordable housing, because if houses are affordable, some people will rent them and others will buy them. So we must ensure that there is a choice for people where that choice is available. So that means that there should be a mixture of housing available. Some are social houses, others have shared equity, others have built on community land, or a community trust runs the estate in order to keep the prices down. And so the aim is to ensure that there is a broad choice available as regards the type of housing available. We have already committed to a major investment in social housing, and also we're looking at how we can help those who are looking to buy but can't afford to do so at present.
First Minister, given that the size of social housing stock declined dramatically since 1980, when the right to buy was introduced, resulting in longer waiting times for people in housing need, will you join me in welcoming the end to right to buy by a Welsh Labour government via the abolition of the right to buy and Associated Rights Wales Act 2018? Will you also welcome Welsh Government investment in social housing in my constituency, the Vale of Glamorgan, including not only extensive investment through our social housing grant to housing associations, the building of new council housing by, in fact, what was then a Labour council running the Vale of Glamorgan, and also, importantly, 2.8 billion major repairs allowance to enable the Vale of Glamorgan Council to bring social housing up to the Welsh Housing Quality Standard.
Well, I was fortunate enough to join the member, President Gibbons, then, when we saw the refurbishment work that was taking place there. And local people, of course, were delighted with what they saw there. I've always said that if you try and build social housing while at the same time still have the right to buy, it's like filling up the bath with a plug out. Except for the whole of the 1980s, the Tories let the plug out and didn't leave the taps on at all. You can't replace your housing stock if you allow it to be sold at a rate that doesn't allow you to keep up. It's one of the reasons why we saw so much homelessness, particularly that began in the 1980s, because public housing wasn't available. In Powys, I think, I remember reading, around half of the public housing stock was lost and never replaced. Now, how on earth can that be fair on people in rural areas, particularly when it's difficult to buy in some rural areas, because people move in with lots of money from elsewhere and local people can't compete? So it's hugely important that we ensure that there's a proper supply of public housing, and that does mean, of course, creating a situation where public housing remains just that, public.
Question 5, Sean Gwenton.
Will you publish a specific timetable for the development of Parc Bryn Cegin Business Park near Bangor?
Well, the development land at Parc Bryn Cegin is available for development now and is being actively marketed via our commercial property agents, Cook and Arkwright, our property database, as well as Gwynedd Council.
The first plans for this business park were published in the year 2000. New roads were built and a new roundabout, and a new entrance to the park was also opened. It was pledged that at least 1,500 jobs would be created. Now, 18 years later, not a single job has been created, despite the millions of pounds invested to develop Parc Bryn Cegin. Isn't it time for the Welsh Government to give priority, energy and enthusiasm to the task of developing Parc Bryn Cegin?
Well, the history of Parc Bryn Cegin is this. The member is right in saying that the history goes back 18 years. Planning permission had been granted as regards employment, namely factories and offices at the time, and we invested heavily between 2006 and 2008 in order to prepare the site for development, namely putting the roads in and putting the services in. But of course, in 2008 we saw the crash, and after that it started to become difficult at that point to draw people in because of the crash. There is now hope that we may be able to progress the situation. I understand that the developers, Liberty Properties, have said that a multiplex cinema might be coming to the site itself. And of course, if that is true, we look forward to seeing that being established in order to help to assist the site as they attract more businesses in ultimately.
Question 6, Heaven David.
What action is the Welsh Government taking to address the problem of estate management charges?
Well, the review of unadopted roads initiated by the Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Transport is now underway, and that work will complement that of the leasehold advisory group convened by the Minister for Housing and Regeneration. And I know the member has raised this before in this chamber. It's a hugely important issue, something that is relatively new in its concept, but one which we must deal with in order to make sure people aren't exploited.
And increasingly so, people are buying freehold accommodation and being forced to pay these charges to private companies on top of their council tax to maintain their estates. In Cwmcalon in Estramynnoch, my constituency, Meadfleet, the estate management company there, have announced that the charges are going to rise per 6 months from £61 to £78. And there's nothing anyone can do about it. It's totally beyond democratic control. 10 years ago, Barnet Council became known as the EasyJet Council, whereby people pay extra for their services on top of their council tax for so-called additional services. It's now known as the outsourced council. Well, estate management charges are outsourcing by stealth, but at least with EasyJet you can choose whether you pay for overpriced peanuts. What more can the government do?
I can assure the member that this is part of what the Task and Finish Group will be considering. He makes the point quite rightly that where new estates of houses are built, people are, these days, often told there is a service charge to pay for grass cutting, a service charge to pay for upkeep, to pay for the roads, pay for the pavements, but they're still paying council tax at the same level, of course. So they're paying twice for a service that should be provided by a local authority. I would hope that no local authority in Wales sees estate management charges as a way of granting planning permission without the ongoing revenue cost that an estate of houses would cost them. I hope that isn't the case, but certainly I can give him that assurance that this will be something that the Task and Finish Group will look at.
Question 7, Dawn Bowden.
Llywydd. What action is the Welsh Government taking to help prevent identity fraud?
Well, this is primarily a matter for the UK Government, but we're committed to making our communities safer and to continue to work with the UK Government to tackle crime.
Thank you, First Minister. And as you'll know, identity fraud is a serious criminal activity which can cost individuals heavily. And analysis by the anti-fraud organisation Cyfarfod shows that in Wales there's been some reduction in the overall number of frauds, but identity fraud rose by about 14% between 2016 and 2018, and there were over 4,000 cases in Wales in 2017. So would you join me in recognising the important work carried out by organisations, including Trading Standards and Age Cymru, which help more vulnerable citizens in tackling this crime? And can you tell me what more Welsh Government could do to raise awareness of the advice being offered to protect ourselves against identity fraud?
Well, I can tell the member that an individual that I'm aware of has taken out a loan with the bank, has defaulted on that loan, and informed the bank that they have moved to where we live. So I'm receiving letters myself, now addressed not to me, but to this individual at my address, so no one is, can escape this. But it's an important point, and I know that you had an event in the Senedd on the 19th of September raising awareness of tackling fraud and scams. Of course, the Cabinet Secretary approved up to £3,000 of funding for the Wales Against Scams partnership, which is hugely helpful. I know that he has also met with the Minister of the Home Office to discuss the serious organised crime strategy implementation to meet the needs of Wales. And, of course, we'll continue to provide funding of £16.8 million in the next financial year for an additional 500 community support offices in Wales.
Thank you. Question 8, Neil Hamilton.
Will the First Minister provide an update on the Welsh Government's preferred outcome from the ongoing Brexit negotiations?
It is to be found in the White Paper Securing Wales's Future.
I thank the First Minister for that uninformative reply. I'm sure the First Minister will agree with me that Theresa May has badly bungled the negotiations with Brussels. The Chequers proposals were always going to be stillborn. No real preparations have been made for leaving the EU without a deal. And there isn't much time left to negotiate a free trade agreement, such as the one which was agreed with Canada. Where does the Labour Party stand in all this? Sir Keir Starmer, the Brexit spokesman for Labour in the UK, seems to have said that Labour will vote against anything that Theresa May comes up with or is allowed to come up with between now and next March. Jeremy Corbyn, with whom I marched through many lobbies voting against EU legislation over the years, seems to be sitting on the fence. Keir Starmer seems to have made it clear that he wants a second referendum come what may, whereas John McDonnell, on the other hand, says that whilst he's in favour of a people's vote on whatever emerges, it shouldn't include the option of leaving the EU. What does the First Minister think? Should there be a second referendum in which there is an option for leaving the EU or not?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is there is an increasing mood music in this chamber and outside that if there is no deal, and therefore a disaster, it'll be the fault of the Remainers, not the fault of those who gave a pie-in-the-sky analysis 2 years ago of what the referendum would mean. We were told it would be the easiest negotiation ever. It hasn't been. We were told the EU would fold in the face of the UK's demands. It hasn't done. We were told the German car manufacturers would drive to the rescue, and would force the German government to accept the deal favourable to the UK. They haven't done it. The reality is the UK is more divided than the EU has been at all in the course of this process. Now, he asked my view on it. First of all, to put this in context, I've heard his party argue strongly against a second referendum, and yet he was a member of a party who for 8 years argued strongly for a second referendum after 1997 because they didn't like the result and went into the 2005 general election on a manifesto of having a second referendum on the existence of the Assembly. So there's a certain level of double standards there that has to be recognised. Now, what do I think should happen? Firstly, if there is no agreement on a deal, in other words, that means no deal or no agreement on a proposed deal in not just Westminster but this place and Edinburgh as well, I don't see any alternative other than a general election. And in that general election, Brexit would be the only topic, I suspect, of discussion. In that general election, it is right to say that the issue could be given a proper airing and the people could decide. If, however, the result of that general election was inconclusive, well, how else do you then resolve the issue other than by going back to the very people who made the decision in the first place, but who now would be in a position to see exactly what Brexit would mean? Now, to me, that is the point where a second referendum becomes something that is that would need to be looked at, because how else do you resolve the situation? At this moment in time, I think we have to wait and see what happens in October and November, and then take decisions from there.
Stephen Lewis.
But in terms of a general election in the event of an impasse of the House of Commons, what does the First Minister think would be achieved by any outcome that is possible there? Because, of course, both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn want to take us out of the single market and the customs union. So surely a choice of hard Brexit isn't a choice at all. And I noticed that in his reply to Mr Hamilton, he failed to answer one very important and timely question, which is the fact that if there is to be a referendum on the deal or no deal scenarios, should there also be a question there asking the people whether or not they wish to remain in the European Union?
I think that's likely. I think that there are two possibilities here, are there not? If there's no deal, then it would be no deal or remain. If there is a deal, it becomes a bit more complicated in the sense it's, do you accept the deal? But if you don't, what do you want? No deal or remain? You know, there are ways in which the Electoral Commission, I'm sure, can finesse that referendum. But if there's no deal on the table, well, surely people have the right to express a view as to whether they wish to leave in circumstances that not one Brexiteer suggested would happen. No, nobody said 2 years ago, if there's no deal, it doesn't matter. No one said it. Everyone said there will be a deal. That's changed. I don't like the idea of a second referendum on exactly the same issue, which is why I opposed a second referendum in 1997. But where the circumstances have changed fundamentally, where the promises that were made 2 years ago have come to nothing, then at that point, and if there's an inconclusive result in a general election, and who knows what parties might put forward in a general election, I'm sure the Lib Dems will put forward something quite different again. I'm sure his party will as well. But there has to come a point where if there is an impasse, the people have to decide. And they have to be allowed to decide on the basis of what they know now and not on what they were told 2 years ago, which hasn't happened.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, First Minister. Item 2 on